This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER Showtime, The Waltons, a CBS television series. VIEW-MASTER Reel 1. Picture 1. The day began heavily, as most days did for the Walton family, but from that point on it was downhill all the way. Breakfast time as enthusiasm greeted Mary Ellen's plea that the whole family attend the big barn dance down at the livery stable the following night. Even the adults, John and Olivia, Grandma and Grandpa, caught fire at the prospect of kicking up their heels a little. In the depths of the greatest depression on record, there was precious little excitement in their lives. Grandma's eyes in particular brightened at word that the dance scholar would be Fred Hansen, with whom she had cut many a fancy caper on the dance floor when she was a girl. The same news brought a snort from Grandpa. "That skinny little squirt," he exclaimed, "never wanted to do anything but sashay you around the floor." "But don't forget, Zeb," said Grandma dreamily, "I always saved my wild Irish rose for you." His eyes softened, but he snorted again to keep up appearances. Picture 2. No sooner were the young Waltons off to school, chattering about the barn dance treat, than fate lowered the boom in the form of a car that drove up the lane and halted near the front gate. It was a man from the electrical company who announced apologetically that it was his duty to cut off the power if the Waltons didn't have the money to pay their long overdue bill. "Lord knows, I hate to do it, folks," he said with sympathy, "but I've got my orders." John Walton shrugged helplessly. "I've got a lot of money owed to me, but collecting it's another matter. Nobody's got cash money these days. Reckon you'll have to go ahead and do your job." Picture 3. While John set off in the forlorn hope of raising the $2.17 needed to restore the electricity, Olivia emptied her cash can. "It's worse than I thought," she told Grandma in dismay. "We've got exactly 22 cents to our name." Thinking a moment, she handed the coins to Grandpa. "Go down to I Godsey's, if you don't mind," she said, "and spend this on candles. At least we'll have light." The old man took scant pleasure from the jingling of the coins in his pocket as he trudged down the road to the store. At the Y in the road he paused. Brow fiercely furrowed with thought, then veered abruptly and set off along the left fork instead of the right. He had made a decision. Picture 4. At Anchor Barnes Place, John found his old friend and neighbor worried, apologetic and broke. "Don't like owing money, John," Anchor said. "Never did, never will, especially when it's to a friend. Way times are, though I hardly see $1 from one month to the next." He insisted in the end that John take his best hog as part payment on the debt. "If you can get cash for her," he said, "you can pay 12 light bills." Picture 5. John Boy got home from school to find his mother waiting with a worried frown. "Hurry down to Godsey's," she told him, "and see if Grandpa's there. And if he isn't, try to track him down." She explained that Grandpa had started off that morning to get candles and hadn't been heard from since. "Grandma's worrying herself sick," she added. He probably got into a game of pool and forgot what day it is, John Boy said. Don't worry, I'll fetch him. But the storekeeper shook his head. No, John Boy, I haven't seen your grandpa for 3-4 days now. Reckon he took it into his head to go fishing. Doesn't seem likely, John Boy told him, but I'll look along the river anyway. He started out, but turned back hesitantly. Grandpa had money for candles. Reckon you could let us have a few on credit, just till Grandpa shows up. As the genial Ike wrapped up a dozen candles, he said, I'll ask all the customers if they've seen your grandpa. Picture 6. Grandpa, meanwhile, was having an adventuresome day. His inspiration of the morning had taken him to the imposing home of the Mrs. Mamie and Emily Baldwin, daughters of the late Judge Baldwin. After a bit of jovial diggering, they made a deal. Grandpa would repair the faulty drain pipes for $2.50, plus the use of the sisters' car for an errand in Charlottesville. The sisters held out for a ride to go along for the outing. Thus it was that Grandpa, exuding southern gallantry from every pore, deposited his lady friends at the curb that afternoon in front of Harbor's drugstore. It had been a gay ride, the three of them singing songs and clowning it up in a sedate but enthusiastic way. So intent was the old man upon carrying out his project that he failed to give so much as a thought to the effect of his prolonged absence on Grandma. Unbeknownst to him, she was already envisioning his lifeless body lying crumpled at some lonely roadside, struck down by a heedless truck, or murdered by desperados for the 22 cents in his pocket. Picture 7. In the drugstore, the lifeless body managed to down with gusto a chocolate soda on the house, as Mr. Harbour put it, because he was an old friend of the Baldwins. The druggist's generosity just might have been stimulated by a little token the sisters brought him. It was a mason jar of what the church had always called the receipt, concocted by himself in the cellar. Harbour and Grandpa exchanged winks, knowing, as the sisters did not, that the receipt would test about 100 proof. VIEW-MASTER Reel 2, Picture 1. In the Walton house, the flickering candlelight served only to exaggerate the fears of the older people. John Boy did his best to entertain the young ones with shadow pictures on the wall. When John came in, his announcement that he had managed to sell the hog for cash went almost unnoticed. Grandma could think of nothing but her fears, and soon he agreed to take her in the truck to hunt for Grandpa. As luck would have it, they were passing the Baldwin house just as Grandpa drove up with his lady friends, and Grandma's relief turned to a fury so cold she could scarcely be civil to the Baldwins. As they drove home, she lit into her hapless mate so hard that at last he turned stubborn and refused to divulge the reason for his trip to town and for being with the Baldwins in the first place. Things were no better at home. Grandma's outrage at being left to fear for Grandpa's life while he was gallivanting around with a pair of females grew more intense rather than less so with every word he spoke. At last he stomped down the stairs, leaving her to stew in her own jealous juice. Picture 2. Well, anyway, John told his father soothingly, "We'll have the lights back on tomorrow. With the money for the hog, I'll settle the bill in the morning." "No need to," returned Grandpa, savoring his moment of triumph in spite of everything. "Baldwin sisters paid me for fixing them old pipes, and I took the money to town and paid the bill. They went along for the ride." John stared at him. "Why didn't you tell that to Grandma?" "Blame it all, I tried," exploded the old man. "She turned a deaf ear. So now she can just find it out for herself, because I'm not going to try again. And don't you tell her either." John grinned. "Okay, but I hope you're ready to sleep on the sofa tonight." Picture 3. But Grandpa didn't sleep on the sofa. He didn't even sleep in the house. John Boy heard all about it in the morning from his father. Half amused and half worried, John related how Grandpa had lost his temper upon being banished to the sofa, thrown some clothes into a bag, and gone storming out into the night. "But where did he go?" John Boy asked uneasily. John shrugged. "House of a friend, maybe. No telling. Look, I understand you're going down to Ike's to pay him for the candles. Keep an eye out for Grandpa and ask around." Picture 4. It wasn't much of a search. Ike greeted John Boy with a grin and a jerk of his head toward the back of the store. There was Grandpa, bedded down on the pool table, covered with a blanket and snoring up a storm. "Costumers be coming in soon," Ike said. "Best you wake him up." After waking the old man in easy stages, John Boy asked, "You planning to come home, Grandpa?" "Depends," was the reply. "On what?" "On whether certain people realize they've been misjudging me, and if certain people come down here and tell me so." "Wouldn't mean Grandma, would you?" asked John Boy. "Could be," Grandpa said, getting into his shoes. "Can you imagine her apologizing? She's done harder things in her day, but it's up to her, boy. You just tell her I'm down here." "I'll tell her," John Boy told him dubiously, "but I won't hold my breath till she gets here." On the way out, he paid Ike for the candles and got an expressive wink in return. Picture 5. At home, Mary Ellen was moping around, feeling sorry for herself because without electricity she couldn't iron her party dress, and without a fresh ironed dress she couldn't go to the barn dance. "Well, if that's all that ails you," said Grandma indignantly, "there's still the kind of iron around here that you heat on the stove. Used them many a time when I was a girl, and nobody ever said my dresses weren't fresh and pretty." She was still urging Mary Ellen to snap out of the sullens and get to work, when without warning the radio let loose a blast of music, startling them both. The electricity was on. The explanation came from John, who happened along a little later. "The bill's paid, Grandma," he said. "Grandpa paid it yesterday." "Grandpa paid it? But he didn't have any money." "He did after he fixed the pipes over at the Baldwin place. They paid him $2.50 cash and rode into town with him while he paid it." Grandma looked confused and indignant. "Well, why in the nation didn't he tell me so? Or why didn't you, young man?" "We tried to, Mama, both of us." "But you weren't doing much listening." She was spared the difficulty of answering that observation by the arrival of John Boy, who announced he had located Grandpa at Ike's store. Olivia, who had already talked with John Boy, explained, "I'm sure Grandpa's willing to meet you halfway. Why not give him a chance? It was a struggle, but at last Grandma untied her apron. I'll get my hat, John boy, she said. Picture 6. Once she had made her decision, Grandma could hardly wait to make her peace with Grandpa, and John boy found his spirits rising as he wheeled her up to the store's entrance in the old pickup. Picture 7. Inside the store, Grandma pretended to be looking at dresses. John boy looked around, but Grandpa was nowhere to be seen. When John boy inquired about him, Ike replied, "He's gone. Took off about 15 minutes ago." John boy was baffled. But he intended to wait here, and did he say where he was going? Ike nodded. Said he was going over to the Baldwin place. John boy could sense his grandmother's slight body stiffen. Her silence spoke for itself. At last she broke it in a wooden voice. "We'll be going home now." "En route," he said. "There's sure to be a reason, Grandma." Her answer was a stony silence that boded ill for Grandpa. VIEW-MASTER Reel 3. Picture 1. Grandpa had suddenly realized he didn't have the bottle of cologne he had bought for Grandma yesterday at Harper's drugstore with what had been left of his wages. He hurried off to see if he had left it with the sisters. As it turned out, he had. While Miss Mamie went to find it among her own purchases, Miss Emily treated him to a glass of the receipt, of which they had been making a fresh batch. Thus fortified, he started back for Ike's, only to be picked up by John boy, who had set out once more to find him after taking Grandma home. Picture 2. A few words sufficed to let Grandpa know he was in the doghouse again. He listened in silence, then laid his gift on the seat. "You take this to Grandma," he said. "Me, you can take back to Ike's. From there I just might go visit a cousin of mine over in Fluvanna County for a spell." John boy tried to reason with him, but got nowhere. When he delivered a gift to Grandma, she looked so stunned he was relieved to leave her to Olivia. But not even his mother's ready sympathy could prevail over the wall of wounded pride that had arisen between the two old people. As Olivia left Grandma's room, though, inspiration seized her, a plan that just might work. She was smiling as she entered the kitchen, a smile that grew still happier when she saw what Mary Ellen had been up to. Picture 3. With the house full of gloom, thick enough to slice because of the old people's misunderstanding, Mary Ellen had about given up all hope of going to the barn dance. All the same, she had taken Grandma's advice and worked herself out of the glooms, ironing not just her own party dress, but all the rest of the laundry as well. Now here came her mother with a conspiratorial smile. "Good thing you did your dress first, honey," she said admiringly, "while you were at your best. You're going to knock 'em dead at the dance tonight." "Oh, Mama, do you mean it? Will we all go?" "All," replied Olivia, "including Grandma and Grandpa." She hesitated. "That is, if my plot comes off." "Plot?" asked the girl. Olivia nodded. "I'm going to put the green-eyed monster, jealousy, to work in a good cause for once." Stemming a barrage of questions with a wave, she said, No time for explanations. Find John Boy and tell him I want him to go to the store. I'll tell him what to tell Grandpa. Picture 4. We're all going to the dance, even Grandma, John Boy announced as he appeared at Ike's, all duked up, on the pretext of delivering an unneeded sandwich. Grandma's going? Asked the old man sharply. Yup, she's even more excited than Mary Ellen. On account of what's his name? The caller. Fred Hansen, muttered Grandpa scornfully. Sorry you're not going too, said John Boy sadly. There was an interval of silence. Then Grandpa surged to his feet. Who says I'm not going? He demanded. Picture 5. The barn dance was in full swing. Even the younger Waltons were excited, mainly because of the refreshments. Grandma's eyes were sparkling as she beat time to the music, listening to the expert calling of her beau of long ago. The Baldwin sisters were on hand, prime but enthusiastic. As the first set ended and the musicians turned up for the next, Grandma turned from answering a question of Olivia's to meet the smiling eyes of the caller. Bowing in courtly fashion, the man Grandpa had called a skinny little squirt said, Hello, Esther. I saw you come in, and I told the boys I wouldn't call another set until you had danced with me. He held out his hands. May I? To her annoyance, Grandma felt herself blushing and glanced inquiringly at John, who smiled. Why not, Mama? This is your night to howl. Picture 6. Graceful still, Grandma was happily dancing when suddenly she stiffened as a tall, familiar figure came striding belligerently to the edge of the floor. It was Grandpa, with thunderclouds in his face. Quickly she smiled her sweetest smile up into the face of her partner. After that every Walton eye in the hall, along with a good many others, glued itself to Grandpa as he wheeled and marched across to where the Baldwin sisters sat. Bowing with old-world gallantry, he asked Miss Emily to dance. John and Olivia watched as their two old people circled the floor, alternately glaring and feigning unawareness of each other's existence. After a minute or two of this, Olivia nodded to her husband. All right, she said, do your stuff. Sidling over to the musicians, John spoke into the ear of the nearest, who grinned and nodded. A moment later, the nostalgic strains of My Wild Irish Rose filled the crowded hall. Picture 7. The tune caught Grandma's ear at once, and her step faltered as she turned instinctively toward her husband. He was dancing with Miss Mamie now and gave no sign of even recognizing the tune. For all she thought it, a tear came to Grandma's eye. But Grandpa was just a little slow on the uptake. Seconds later his brain registered the sound, the song that had been his and Grandma's always. He halted in mid-step, nearly tripping poor Miss Mamie, and frantically signaled John Boy to take his place. Muttering apologies, he strode to Grandma, separated her from her startled partner without a word. That tune, Esther, he said. When I heard it, no foolish bride nor anything else could keep me away. I've been saving that one for you, Seb, she whispered, for 50 years.